Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and this is another video to help you improve your chess game. If you haven't told your friends about my channel, it's Dan Heisman Chess here on YouTube. I'd like to start by thanking the Chess Journalists of America. They just gave out their annual awards for 2021, and I'm happy to say that one of my videos won the award for Best Instructive Video for 2021. I think the name of the video was something like How to Make Better Chess Moves, or How to Make Better Moves. And another one of my videos, I think Introduction or a Beginner's Guide to Chess Analysis, won honorable mention for the same thing, Best Instruction. And my Twitter feed, Chess Tip of the Day, won Best Twitter Feed. So I'd like to thank the Chess Journalists of America for those awards. And hopefully that helps you understand you're watching some pretty good videos to help you improve your chess game. Okay, so besides passing the word, you could subscribe to the channel, you could like the video. Alright, so today I'm going to talk about chess sets and goals. I tell people when you're doing chess problems, you want to do problems that are going to occur in games frequently. At least when you start out, you want to do repetitious, easy tactics. You're not doing them to solve them. We know if they're easy, you can solve them. You're doing them so you can recognize them. Just like if someone asks you what 6 times 7 is, you don't go 7 and 7 is 14, 7 is 21, 7 is 28, 7 is 35, 7 is 42. That's the right answer, but you know how to solve it, yes. But if you just recognize it and say, oh, 6 times 7, I memorized that in second grade, it's 42, then that's really the way that we want you to do it. And it's the same thing with basic chess problems. We want you to recognize them. So I thought I'd start out with a couple of problems that typically sell chess books, easy tactics chess books, but they're not the kind of problems that really occur a lot in games, but they're the kind of problems that you see in a lot of books. And those are the kind of books that I think are okay to do, but I don't think they should be the first books that you do. So the first problem is white to play. All right, well, if we count the material, white is down a piece and a rook. So if he is going to win, he can't just play like e takes d7 check and win the knight, because he's still down a whole rook, and that's not enough. So we got to look for maybe trying to win his queen or checkmate him or something. And when you're doing tactical problems, you're going to look for checks, captures, and threats. So let's systematically look at all of white's checks and see if we can get anywhere. All right, well, let's look at the knight check. Knight to d6 check. I'm not going to actually make the moves on the board. I'm not even going to draw the lines. I drew that line just to show you the move. But does that do anything? All right, so knight d6 check. His only legal move is bishop takes d6. How does that help white? Can white now take the knight with checkmate because the queen's guarding it too? No. Does that take the bishop off the pawn on g5? Yes, but that doesn't help. So it doesn't look like knight d6 is going to be the move. Let's look at the checks with the queen. We've got 4 checks with the queen. All right, well, all of them are sacrifices. Does that mean we shouldn't do them because we're going to lose our queen? No, maybe we can give up our queen and checkmate him. What would we checkmate him with? I don't know, a pawn or a knight or something? All right, so let's look at each one. Let's start with queen takes f8 check. Unfortunately, he's got 3 ways to take back with a king, with a bishop, and a knight, and we'd have to mate him on all of those. Well, it's true, if he takes with a knight, I can play knight g7 mate, but he doesn't have to take with a knight. Suppose he just takes with a king. Well, I can win his knight then, but I've already given up a queen for a rook, and I'm already way behind in material, so that doesn't seem to work. All right, let's look at queen takes e7 check. Queen takes e7 check. He would play queen takes e7. That frees up the g7 square for my knight, but if I play knight g7 check, he can play queen takes g7. If I play knight takes e7, he plays king takes e7. I play e takes d7. He can just take back, and he's up a rook in the endgame. That's not very good. So I don't want to trade off when I'm losing. So what's that line that I just showed you? Queen takes e7, queen takes e7, knight takes e7, king takes e7, e takes d7. He could play something like king takes d7, and he's up a rook for a pawn in the endgame. No good. Okay, well, how about queen f7 check? I'm not getting anything from my queen, but if I mate him, great. All right, queen f7 check. He has to play rook takes f7. Well, that's good. That's forcing. Rook takes f7. Then knight d6 check is not mate. Knight g7 check, unfortunately, is not mate. he can take with the rook. So queen f7 check, rook takes, I could take with the pawn. Pawn takes, check. Then he doesn't have to take my pawn. He could even play king f8 there. Can I beat him if he plays king f8 and if he plays king f7? I don't think so. So queen f7 check doesn't seem to work. All right, we got one more check to look at. Queen g6 check. If he puts the rook in the way, rook f7, queen takes f7 mate. So he has to take with the pawn. H takes g6. Why would I want to give up my queen for nothing? Well, it does open up the square g7 for my knight to check. Knight g7 check. Oh, that's checkmate. Oh, well, that must be the solution then. Queen g6 check. If he puts the rook in the way, rook f7, I take it off, queen takes f7 mate. If he plays h takes g6, I play knight g7 mate. So it's a mate. All right, well, that's cute, and that's the kind of problem that sells chess books. But how often would you get something like this in a game? If you did, it would be really good to look at stuff like this, because doing these checkmate problems gives you a large bang for your buck, because, you know, you could be down material and still win the game. So, you know, doing these kind of problems is really helpful. But most games aren't won this way. Most games aren't won when you sacrifice your queen and mate him with a knight and a beautiful mate, you know, here early in the game. I ask my students the following question. How many times have you ever won a game by checkmating your opponent when you were not ahead in material? In other words, you had an even, you know, material or even behind in material, like in this position, checkmate, and you won the game. And most of my students say that rarely happens, and that's true. That's the point. You win more games when you win his knight and then you trade everything off by attrition, or you win a pawn and you end up in the endgame up a pawn and you end up getting it promoting to a queen, and you win that way. Then you do games like this where you play queen g6 check and sacrifice your queen. Now, it doesn't sell a lot of books, you know, to have a tactic where you win a pawn, but that's the more common way that you're winning games, and that's the kind of tactics that you want to study, tactics where you're winning material. It's not that you shouldn't study tactics like this at all. Of course you should. It's just that if you study all tactics like this, and if you buy a tactical set that has a million problems like this, then you're not going to win that many games that way, because these aren't the kind of positions that come. In fact, this particular position is not what I would call a commonly occurring position, meaning not only don't you win that often early in the game, but in order for you to pull off this kind of queen sacrifice and mate with a knight, you have to be a position that's very similar to this. This is not a commonly occurring thing. There's some tactics that occur over and over and over again. And International Master Mark Dvoretsky, who was the leading chess trainer for many years, said there's about 2,000 of those basic problems that occur again and again and again and again in games. And they're the ones you want to study first. That's why I usually recommend starting out with something like John Bain's Chess Tactics for Students and doing those problems over and over again, because those are the problems that occur in games a lot. Let's do one more like this, kind of the rare kind, and then we'll look at more of the common type that you should be looking at. All right, so let me close this window. Okay, here's another one. Let me center the board. All right, we'll bring it down this way. Widen it a little bit. Okay, so this is white to play. All right, so let's count the material. Both sides have 2 rooks. Both sides have a knight, but black has 2 extra bishops. White has a pawn for the 2 bishops. All right, well, if you're down 2 bishops, then winning, like, if I play like knight takes a8 and he plays, well, he could even do nothing if he wants to. He's still up in material. But if he plays bishop takes a8, then I have queen c8 check, and that will be mate. But if I play knight takes a8 and he doesn't play, he could play something like, maybe he could even play queen takes a2 check. That's a counting problem now. Knight takes a8, queen takes a2 check, queen takes a2, knight takes a2. If white plays king takes a2, then black plays... No, he still can't play bishop takes a8 because of rook d8 mate. So knight takes a8 does get a rook, but we're still down 2 bishops for that rook. And I think white has probably, it looks like he has an okay position because of all those mate threats. So knight takes a8 is a candidate move. Is it the best move? Well, it's our king of the hill. The king of the hill is the best move you found so far. So we could always play knight takes a8 with the idea that he can't play bishop takes a8 because we have queen c8 check. All right, so that doesn't look bad. So let's look for something better. Can we checkmate him? Well, rook d8 right away is not checkmate. I could play rook d7 and threaten mate on f7. If I play rook d7, he could still play queen takes a2 check and trade queens. But then at the end, maybe I can somehow take the rook. Maybe rook d7, queen takes a2, knight takes a2, and then knight takes a8. That looks pretty good, but he doesn't have to play queen takes a2. On rook d7, he could stop the mate with bishop to d5. And then if I play knight takes d5, my knight can't take the rook anymore. And he can take back, let's say, with the knight. And if I take the knight, he can just trade off on d5. And I'm not mating him, and I'm not winning the rook. So I'm looking at the line something like rook d7, threatening mate on f7. Notice it's hard for him to guard that square. Then he could play something like bishop d5, hitting the queen. If I play knight d5, he can play knight d5, blocking the line again. If I now take with the queen, he can just trade queens, and he's up a bishop in the endgame, although his king's a little out of play, and I could threaten to mate him by playing rook on 1 to d1 after that. All right, so, I don't have this game in examine mode. All right, I can't go back. Let's see here. I think this is number 127. All right, let's bring up number 127. All right, let me bring this up a little bit so I can type examine %127. Oh, nope, it's not. All right, well, the answer to that problem, let me go get it a second. The answer to that problem is actually a queen sacrifice, just like the previous problem. Queen takes f7 check, king takes f7, and now rook to d7 check. All right, black can't put anything in the way, so he only has two legal moves, king f8 and king g8. If he plays king g8, then f7 check, and if he plays his king to f8 or g7, you have knight e6 mate. You have to visualize that. If you play queen f7 check, king f7, rook d7 check, king f8, then he plays knight e6 check. If the king moves to e8, then rook e7 mate. If he goes to g8, then f7 mate. All right, so you can't visualize that? We'll show it to you. Queen takes f7 check, king takes f7 forced, rook checks. All right, there's two lines. You can't go to e8, so it has to be one of these two. If he plays g8, pawn checks. Now he has two different moves, but they both get mated by the same move.
Checkmate.
Knight to e6. All right, what about the other line? Well, he could go here first, and now we can check. And again, he has two moves, e8 and g8. If he plays e8,
checkmate.
Rook e7 is checkmate. If he plays g8, then
Checkmate.
f7 is checkmate. So that's the right answer. The right answer is to sacrifice your queen and mate him. Well, again, very cute. You know, these kind of things sell books. But on the other hand, you know, you're not going to win very many games this way. It's nice that you can, and it's nice that you practice them. But the first thing you want to practice is, you know, how do I save my knight? You know, how do I win his knight? What are the tactics that occur? This tactic would only occur in this position. It's very nice that you can solve it, but it's not something that occurs over and over and over again, day in and day out. The same kind of tactics. When I watch weaker players play, they fall for the exact same kind of tactics over and over again, the kind that occur in the Bain book and a lot of other books. They fall for those tactics. They don't take their time. They don't recognize them. They might be able to solve them if you give them the Bain book and you say white to play and win. They get it right away. But in a game, they make a move that allows their opponent to do that exact same Bain problem to them because they don't recognize the danger. And even if they recognize it, they don't analyze it right, or if they don't recognize it. So let's pick out a problem. Let's do number 77. Okay. So here is a Bain tactic. Now this is not a position that's going to occur over and over again. This is more unique also. But it's the kind of position that can occur. It's it's white to play and win. Win doesn't mean checkmate. Win means get to a position where you're winning material. And the answer to this problem, well, of course, like any of the problems in our videos, you can always pause the video before I give the answer and see if you can solve it yourself. White to play and win. All right, well, you're always looking for your checks, captures, and threats. If you play rook to d2 check, that doesn't work. He can just play either king to c8 or maybe even bishop d6. So let's look at our captures. Well, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, rook d8. Rook e8 is not mate because the rook's guarding it. And besides, if you play bishop f6, he doesn't have to take with the bishop. He could take with the pawn, so that capture doesn't do anything. Our only other capture is rook takes e7. Well, if you look at rook takes e7 in a game and you say, I can't do that, rooks are worth more than bishops, that's what's called a quiescence error. In a puzzle, most people don't make quiescence errors because they know to keep going. But in a game, I often see my students miss stuff like this because they're like, oh, I can't play rook takes bishop, it's guarded, and I'll lose a rook for a bishop, and that's no good. Rooks are worth more. But of course, here, after rook takes e7, king takes e7, you have bishop b4 check, skewering the king and the rook. Now, if all that would do would be win the exchange back, that wouldn't be winning. But not only does bishop b4 skewer the king and the rook, but it also removes the guard because the bishop on b5 is preventing him from guarding the rook, and if he moves the king, you could play bishop takes f8. Now, what I also tell my students is when you're analyzing things like this in a real game, you got to be a little bit careful because maybe he has his Zwischenzug. For instance, after rook takes e7, he doesn't have to take the rook right away. He could say, well, I can take the rook on the next move. Let me counterattack the bishop with c6 first. And that way, if he saves the bishop, and then I say take the rook, when he checks me, I can move my king back and guard the rook, and now I have a knight and 5 pawns against a bishop in 5. Okay, well, does c6 therefore save the game? No, because white could play rook takes b7. And now white is up a piece, and black needs to get the piece back. But if the only way he can try to get the piece back is to take the bishop, and now white can check, and after king e7, he has two different ways he could win the position. One is to trade everything off, bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes, king takes, and then push the pawn to a5, and the black king cannot get inside the square and win that way. But even easier, although not better, just easier, is to check again here and remove the guard, and when the king goes away from the rook, you can just take the rook. So it turns out rook takes e7, if king takes, bishop b4 check. A little more clever for black in the defense is to try to throw in c6 to throw a monkey wrench in that, but it doesn't work. But this is a very practical problem. If white sees this, he's going to end up at least a piece, and he's going to win the game. And if you're in a game and you don't play moves like rook takes e7 because you're worried you're going to lose a rook for bishop, well, first of all, if rook takes bishop does lose a rook for a bishop because you look further and there's nothing there, well, then you don't play it. If you look rook takes, king takes, and you just stop, well, then you're not looking further to see if there's something maybe there. And of course, all the seeds of tactical destruction are here. You've got a king and a rook on the same diagonal, and you've got a piece like a queen or a bishop that can move on that diagonal. So there's no reason to stop analyzing at this point. There might be something there, and of course there is, because this is a problem from a book. All right, let's take a look at another problem. We've got a, let's see, number 181. Okay, all right, hanging pieces. All right, well, this is kind of a counting problem. Right now, the problem is black is trying to remove the guard on the rook. And the question is, how does white end up not losing all the material back? Well, if you just move your knight, the knight on f5, he's going to take the rook. But the problem is, if you try to just save the rook and play rook h7, then black can play e takes f6 and get his piece back. So how does white end up material here? Well, you have to do a little bit of counting. And again, this is very practical, kind of thing that occurs all the time in games. Not this exact position, but this kind of issue, which is how does white end up material? Well, one of the easiest things you can do when you're in a position like this is you're up an entire piece. If you're up an entire piece, you can afford to give a little bit of it back to retain the advantage. And the move that does that is rook takes f7 check. And now, if he takes with the rook or the king, I can save the knight. I'm not sure I want to play here and get my knight pinned to my rook. That's a good way to lose it right back after he threatens to bring the other rook over and bring the king up or something. So probably the easiest thing for white to do here is put the knight on a nice safe square where the bishop can't get trapped. You want to make sure if he plays f5 you can save the bishop. So maybe that would be something like knight e3. If he plays f5, bishop here, if he now pins the bishop, the knight and the bishop can both guard the rook. You could play here, and you end up with an endgame with a bishop and a knight against a rook, which, you know, it's not trivial, but if you're a good player, that should certainly be winning. So rook takes f7 check is an easy answer to this kind of tactics problem. And this is what I call a defensive problem, because you're not trying to win anything. You're trying to lose as little as possible so you're still ahead. What else could white play? Well, he could look at rook to h7, and if he takes the knight, he could look at skewering the rook and the king. The problem is that black has bishop to g8. And now if white plays, I don't know, bishop to d5 to hit this bishop, maybe black can keep guarding it with rook to g7. And it doesn't look like white's getting as much here. Let's say a Stockfish what he would do in this. Now, if there is some crazy line like rook h7, Stockfish will find it. Stockfish, what's white's best way of playing here? Stockfish 14 says, you were right the first time, Dan. Just give back the exchange. You're up a piece. Rook takes. His best move is to take with the king. Yes, just move your knight back to where it's nice and safe, e3. If he hits your bishop, now Stockfish says, now you can go for these skewer tricks. Rook, well, now he's even changing his mind. He's just bishop d3, rook h1. They're both winning easily. If he pins the bishop, Stockfish says, well, the bishop's guarded. Just play over here, threaten to skewer him. And white is up by almost 5 pawns, as you can see. Okay, so again, very practical problem. All right, let's do number 91, another easy one. You know, you want to do these easy ones over and over and over again until you recognize them. Okay, this is white to play, and the question is, can white win a piece? All right, so again, you can always pause the video, take your time. And again, this is the kind of thing that comes up over and over and over and over again. So you want to memorize these things. White to play, can white win a piece? All right, well, if you're a lower rated player, I'm sure you noticed that the knight is pinned to the king and by the bishop, and you can attack the knight with something worth less. If you haven't seen my video AWL, you can watch that. So white can AWL him. That's a chance to win a piece. If he takes the pawn, he might win a pawn. You know, black might be able to play knight takes e4. That might win a pawn, maybe, but he's not going to win a piece if he takes the pawn. But this is the move that you're going to try to win a piece. Well, does it win a piece? Well, it looks pretty dangerous for black. If black, you know, does nothing, white's just going to take the knight with the pawn and win a piece. The problem is the pinning piece can be counterattacked with a6. Now, if white takes the knight, black will take the bishop. If white takes the pawn on b7, black will take back. And not only is black even in material here, but he's got this nice rook on the semi-open file. He has his bishop and his knight attacking a pawn, which is not guarded at all. So this is clearly not very good for white. If white plays bishop takes, he does win a pawn temporarily. He's up a pawn here. The problem is this pawn is fairly vulnerable. What black could do is play bishop e7 and castle, and then later on he could attack that pawn with like queen to e8 or a5 and rook a6, and white doesn't have like a white squared bishop that can hold that pawn, and it's going to be very difficult for white to hold that pawn, but certainly white's not winning a piece here. All right, what else could white do? Well, he could keep the pin with bishop a4, but then black plays b5. Well, again, white could try to win a pawn with bishop takes, pawn takes, pawn takes. But again, you know, the rook can come up and attack this pawn. Yes, white can try to hold it or counterattack the pawn on b5, but white's not winning a piece. If white takes the knight and black takes here, this pawn on a5 is pretty weak also. a4, sorry. We could play something like c3 and threaten to win it with the queen. And again, maybe we're winning a pawn here, but we're not winning a piece. So this idea that d5 wins a piece is not true because black can counterattack. Now let's make a really bad move for black to show where it would work. Let's say white castles and black plays one of his worst moves on the board, a5. It looks like that's kind of a nothing move, but it's worse than a nothing move. It's actually a move that prevents black from counterattacking the bishop. Now can white play and win a piece? And the answer is sure. We can play d5, and now he can't counterattack the bishop. And now white's just winning a knight for a pawn. And for instance, bishop d7, d takes c6, b takes c6. White brings the bishop back to d3, and white wins the knight for a pawn. So these are good basic patterns to know. It's much, much more important to understand here that white's not winning a piece with d5 than it is to be able to figure out in my first problem that you could sack the queen with queen g6 and mate with the knight, or that in the second problem you could play queen takes f7 check and then rook d7 check and mate him in 2 more moves. Those are spectacular problems, but you need very specific queen sacrifices. But this kind of stuff comes up all the time. If you don't know that d5 doesn't win a piece, then that kind of information is going to help take you up from, whatever, 1100 to 1300 a lot faster than learning how to sacrifice your queen. So that's why I tell people you want to do tactical sets where the problems are easy, you can do them repetitively till you get sick of them and you memorize them. And they're the kind of problems that occur in games. They don't have to be the exact position that occurs in games, but they have to be the same kind of pattern that occurs over and over and over again, where you really have to know, yes, this is good, no, this is bad. Yes, I can save myself here, no, I can't save myself there. Those basic 2000 Dvoretsky kind of patterns is what you want to know. I have a list of 14 books, I think. Maybe it's a little less, maybe it's 13 books. On my website, on danheisman.com, if you go under more and under recommended book lists, the first list is the Dvoretsky set, where I give a whole bunch of books that I think if you do all those books, you're probably getting a high percentage of those 2,000. But you want to do those over and over again until you get sick of them, until you really know and say, oh yeah, that pattern, I know what to do there. Doing those ones that sell the other books where you have those queen sacrifices, and they're easy. It's mate in 2 or something, and they tell you, oh, white to play in mate in 2, and then oh, I got to sacrifice my queen. Yes, they're a lot of fun, and yes, you want to do those too. But you mainly want to start by doing the ones that occur in games and occur over and over and over again. And you want to do them not because they're easy, you want to do them because you want to recognize them. You could solve them. A lot of my students who are rated 16, 1700, they argue with me till they're blue in the face. They don't want to do books where they can solve all the puzzles. And I say, fine, just play a bunch of speed games against someone rated 2100 some afternoon and figure out why you lost almost all the speed games. And it's almost always going to be because the 2100 recognized and evaluated correctly those basic tactical patterns much more quickly and much more accurately than the 16-1700 did. But the 16-1700 doesn't want to do those basic books because they're, quote, too easy. And I keep telling them, yes, they're easy. Yes, I know you can do all the problems in them, but you're not doing it to solve them. You're doing it to recognize them, so when you play those blitz games against the 2100, you can quickly say to yourself, oh no, I can't play bishop g5, he just plays knight takes e4 and he wins a pawn. I can't do that. That's what you're trying to do. Okay, so today's video was tactical sets and goals. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, please tell your friends about the video. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.